The conference room went completely silent the moment my lawyer placed a thick folder on the table. 5 minutes earlier, HR had been smiling politely while explaining why there was no evidence to support my harassment complaint. They had already decided to close the investigation. My manager sat across from me looking completely relaxed, almost amused, like he'd won. Then, my lawyer opened the folder. He didn't say much. He simply slid several printed emails, security logs, and a small flash drive across the table. The HR director's smile disappeared. My manager's face turned pale. For the first time in 6 months, someone was finally listening. And the strange part wasn't that I won. It was discovering who had secretly been helping me the entire time. My name is Daniel, and until last year, I genuinely loved my job. I worked as a project coordinator for a growing software company outside Chicago. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well, the team was friendly, and I enjoyed solving problems. I figured if I kept working hard, I'd eventually move into management. Then, the company hired a new department director named Greg. At first, everyone thought he was exactly what the company needed. He was confident, charismatic, and knew how to impress executives. Every meeting sounded like a motivational speech. But working under him was completely different. Greg loved taking credit for other people's work. If a project succeeded, it became his accomplishment. If something went wrong, someone else became the target. Unfortunately, that someone else was usually me. It started with small comments. If Daniel were just a little faster, I had to fix Daniel's mistakes before presenting. I wish everyone had my attention to detail. The strange thing was none of those statements were true. At first, I assumed he simply didn't like me. Then the emails started. He'd send confusing instructions late at night, then criticize me the next morning for following them exactly. He'd remove me from important meetings and later complain that I wasn't informed enough. Soon, coworkers stopped asking for my opinion. They assumed Greg's version of events was accurate. I decided to document everything. Every email, every schedule change, every meeting invitation, every edited document. I wasn't planning for a lawsuit. I just wanted proof in case anyone ever questioned my work. 3 months later, things got even worse. Greg announced that our biggest client project had missed several deadlines. During the meeting, he looked directly at me. This happened because Daniel failed to coordinate the team. The room was silent. I knew that wasn't true. I opened my laptop and calmly pulled up the project timeline. Every delayed approval had come directly from Greg. Every postponed meeting had been his decision. I expected him to apologize. Instead, he laughed. Looks like someone is trying to rewrite history. Everyone looked uncomfortable. Nobody defended me. After the meeting, one coworker quietly walked over. "I know you're telling the truth," she whispered, "but nobody wants to challenge him." That sentence stayed with me for weeks. I realized the problem wasn't just Greg. People were scared. Eventually, I filed a formal complaint with Human Resources. I included emails, meeting notes, screenshots, and a timeline showing exactly what happened. HR thanked me. They promised a fair investigation. For a few days, I actually believed them. Then nothing happened. Weeks passed without updates. Whenever I asked, they said they were still reviewing everything. Finally, they scheduled a meeting. The HR representative smiled politely. "After reviewing the available information, we've determined there isn't enough evidence to support your claims." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I reminded them about the emails. They said they weren't conclusive. I mentioned the meeting recordings. Apparently, they hadn't reviewed them. I asked whether they'd interviewed my coworkers. Only 2 people. Both reported directly to Greg. The investigation had been over before it ever started. Walking out of that meeting felt worse than anything Greg had done. I realized HR wasn't protecting employees. They were protecting the company. That evening, I called an employment attorney. I expected a short consultation. Instead, she spent nearly 2 hours reviewing everything I'd collected. When she finished, she leaned back and smiled. "You've been keeping records." I nodded. "For 6 months." She looked genuinely impressed. "You have no idea how unusual that is." Over the next few weeks, we organized everything. Emails became timelines, calendar invitations matched security badge records, project files showed who edited documents and when. Every accusation Greg made could be compared with digital records. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Then my attorney asked one unexpected question. Has anyone else ever complained about him? I honestly didn't know. She made a few calls. Within days, she discovered something shocking. 3 former employees had quietly resigned after similar experiences. None of them had filed lawsuits. None believed anyone would listen. But every one of them still had emails, and they were willing to share them. Suddenly, this wasn't just my story anymore. It was a pattern. My attorney requested another meeting with HR. This time, we weren't asking for another investigation. We were presenting evidence. When we entered the conference room, Greg looked completely confident. HR greeted everyone politely. The legal department joined by video call. My attorney waited until everyone settled down. Then she placed the folder on the table. She calmly explained the timeline. She showed email chains, project revisions, access logs, performance reviews, security records. Then she introduced evidence from former employees whose experiences matched mine almost exactly. The room became painfully quiet. Greg interrupted several times. That's taken out of context. Those emails don't tell the full story. They misunderstood my management style. My attorney never argued. She simply showed another document, then another, then another. Each one contradicted his explanation. Finally, the company's attorney asked Greg a simple question. Did you tell HR that these employees had performance issues before they resigned? Yes. Can you explain why every performance review before you became their supervisor was rated excellent? Greg didn't answer. Nobody spoke for several long seconds. The confidence he'd carried into the room completely disappeared. The meeting ended without a decision. HR said they needed additional time. For the first time, I wasn't worried, because now they couldn't pretend they hadn't seen the evidence. A week later, I received a phone call from the company's legal department. Greg had been placed on immediate administrative leave while they conducted an independent investigation. Another week passed. Then came another call. Greg's employment had been terminated. The company also admitted the original HR investigation failed to follow its own procedures. Several members of HR received additional training, and the complaint process was completely redesigned. But the biggest surprise came a few days later. The coworker who'd whispered, "Nobody wants to challenge him," asked if we could grab lunch. While we were eating, she smiled nervously. "I should probably tell you something." She admitted she'd been anonymously sending copies of meeting notes and archived project files to people she trusted because she was afraid important records would disappear. She never contacted me directly because she worried she'd lose her job. Instead, she'd quietly preserved information that later became available during the investigation. Without realizing it, she'd been protecting us all. I thanked her. She shook her head. I was just waiting for someone brave enough to fight. A few months later, I accepted a position at another company. During my final week, several coworkers stopped by my desk. Some apologized for staying silent. Others admitted they'd wanted to support me but were afraid of becoming targets themselves. I understood. Fear makes ordinary people stay quiet, but silence allows the wrong people to stay powerful. Looking back, hiring a lawyer wasn't the moment everything changed. The real turning point happened months earlier when I decided to save that very first email instead of deleting it. One small decision created a trail of truth that no one could erase. If I'd trusted my memory instead of keeping records, the meeting with HR would have ended exactly the way they planned. Sometimes justice doesn't come from one dramatic speech or one perfect piece of evidence. Sometimes it comes from hundreds of small moments that together tell a story nobody can deny. Have you ever watched someone get away with something simply because everyone else stayed silent, or been the person who finally spoke up? I'd love to hear what you think, because sometimes the hardest part isn't proving the truth, it's finding the courage to tell it.